In some places, they serve lots of percent. But I think those numbers lag. All right, so let's talk about what I would consider to be core issues. I'm sure they're not all the core issues, but they're plenty of the core issues. And when I'm done with this, I was really hoping that we could have a conversation about all this stuff. All right. Early on, charter schools promised that they would be free from the mediocrity of the districts. They would be free to innovate. They would be free to have a small learning environment focused on the kids, and that would take place across the board. And I think any fair assessment would be that that is simply not happening. That is more complicated a picture than that. There are many extraordinarily high-performing charter schools in the country. You could have people on this stage lined up out the door to tell you about these amazing things that have been done in districts that struggle forever and ever and ever. It wouldn't surprise me if there were also standout district schools in those areas that also have done well. But there are also some god-awful charter schools. And you should be saying to yourself, why would there be any god-awful charter schools past the term of their charter, right? Because they should be shut down. But that takes us back to the authorizer. If the authorizer isn't savvy, and the authorizer doesn't do its job and doesn't have the political capital to do the hard part of its job, which is to say no, then those schools don't shut down. I don't know if anybody here is trying to shut a school down, any public school. I have. This is not how you want to be spending your time. Parents are often good choosers for their kids, but not always. And in my experience, they are able to say, well, bad charter schools should be shut down, but my charter school, which is the most performing charter school ever, is just turning the corner. You know, and these are wonderful people, and it's a safe environment, and you're just being really unfair. And they show up in school buses to authorize meetings where we're going to debate whether to shut the school down, and they scream like crazy, do not shut our terrible school down. And the politicians get involved. And everybody gets involved. And all the poor authorizers are like, we have a contract. It says it right here. It's supposed to shut down. You were going to be at 70%. You're at 3%. You know? What are you doing? But it's very hard to shut a charter school down unless you have the structure in place and empowers the authorizer to do its job. And that's why I say, if you go this route, pay attention to that. Because if what you end up with is a dual system of unsuccessful schools, where the bottom fifth, or the bottom 5%, the bottom 10%, however the feds define it, if they're not getting closed, nobody has won here, right? So what you have are some schools that are okay, and we have some schools that are terrible, some schools that are terrific. I sometimes argue that the tools that you put in the hands of charter operators can allow them to succeed in a tremendous way because they're able to control all the features of it. They're able to separate themselves out from whatever the restrictions are that might hold other school leaders back. But on the negative side, the bureaucracy of the district provides you with a certain kind of safety net. You know, somebody's doing payroll. Somebody's providing professional development. Somebody's providing all these sorts of boring things that the initial folks in 1991 were like, we don't need this, we have innovation. So what can happen is that a charter school can fail faster than a regular district school. My opinion, this is not science, this is just my experience. Because they don't have any of those supports. And if the authorizer is asleep and doesn't even know that they're not making payroll, or that they're not teaching Spanish, or they're not doing whatever it is they're doing, then you have a problem. Well, I already said, data shows that strong authorizing and high standards and charters can do well. They can. And so what often happens is those networks of schools that have figured out how to do a program that succeeds with often low-income kids, often in urban areas, sometimes in rural areas, they get replicated, and hopefully you don't have as many of these issues. But let's talk about performance. I mentioned before, it really bums me out how much fighting there is over what the data says. It's because we're really fighting over the politics and the policy issues that underlie these things, more so maybe than we're talking about what the data says. There's been really one major study, national study. There's been a bunch of studies with charter schools. Most of them find, well, they're okay. Some that are strongly in favor of charter schools have found that they're terrific. Some that are really against charter schools have found that they are terrible, terrible. The Credo study at Stanford has been done twice, and is now, I think, at this point looked at as Stanford. Done originally in 2009. The results across the board for charters were not great. 17% found to provide better education than traditional schools, and 37% actually offered worse education. Big shock to a lot of charter school supporters, not so surprising to folks who don't think as highly of them. But within those results, there were determinations made that where it's done well, it's done really well. And there are a bunch of factors that you can look to see how, if we were to do it, how could we do it and get a better result. New Orleans, a good example, again, they decided to really focus on charter schools after the storm and kind of went in with a high level of knowledge about authorizer quality and high standards and how to make that happen. And so they came in, they didn't learn that lesson along the way. It started right then. And I had a hand in trying to repopulate the school system down there. And it certainly seemed to me to be a very purposeful thing. That we want to get this right from the beginning. And so it's encouraging to see that the numbers line up. In 2013, they did a similar study, similar results. Although they focused more this time on the growth and replication of schools, meaning extending schools that have already had some success and are growing. Interesting, they specifically found that weak authorizing leads to mediocrity. They saw high points in Massachusetts, in New York City, and other places where it would be hard to say that the numbers are clearly outpacing the district, and where authorizer, New York and Massachusetts are among the states with the most rigorous authorizing community. Interestingly, they found that performance patterns seem to get set early. That's not, if you're opening a charter school, it's not what you're hoping to hear. Because if you're sort of what they call a mom and pop operation, you know, some folks who are trying to implement your own idea, we would like to think that you have a couple of years to sort of figure this out, you know, to get your sea legs and figure it out. And they weren't finding that. They're saying, well, if they know what they're doing at the beginning, then they know what they're doing. It's just one data point, but it's interesting. They found that the elite networks that I've talked about did particularly well, and they thought that permission to expand should be tied to performance, which makes a lot of sense to me. So in terms of closures, which is a natural follow-up to talking about performance, some recent numbers. I think actually I stole these from your report. The only place I was pulling these slides together. I thought, oh, I haven't seen these before. So thank you, Susan. So basically, we're opening a lot of schools and we're closing some of them. It's interesting to note that the largest reason for closure is not academics, it's finances. It's a lot easier if you're the authorizer to close a school because you can't make payroll because they stole all the money than it is to say, well, we think you're not that good. Because, by the way, here's the answer that you give if you're a school to why you should not be shut down. Give us one more year. Come on, one more year. How hard is it? One more year or almost? It's hard to be authorized once you know that. Mismanagement, another big concern. And there are various other factors that can influence it, but that's pretty much the picture. One feature that doesn't get as much attention as I think it should is trying to maintain a balance between accountability and autonomy. The whole point of charter schools is to take a different route to try and do right by kids and to get results that are really positive for them. And so we free them up by statute to do things in innovative a different sort of way. We free them from rules that would constrain traditional schools. But as I mentioned, sometimes that means they don't do that well. So how proactive should the authorizer be during the charter term as opposed to at renewal? Well, if you see signs of fraud, you're not going to wait. If you see signs of, let's call it educational malpractice, you're not going to wait. But how actively involved does the authorizer get? I would argue that paying no attention to it is not a good idea. But being the New York City Department of Education isn't a good idea either. The New York City Department of Education at this point, which is an authorizer, wants you to pretty much get their approval to do anything. You want to paint that wall, submit all the paperwork, you know? And I think that comes from a place of trying to protect the kids and protect the schools. They have a lot of people sitting in the office that need stuff to do. And so there's a lot of that. But you wonder, sort of throw out the baby with the bathwater there. Especially because if the authorizer is telling you everything to do at every stage, then how are they then going to judge how your performance is? Because they just told you to do. It's a real problem, I think. There's a line that needs to be walked between assuring that the folks are following the charter agreement and are doing good enough to keep going, and getting involved to the point where it squeezes all of the autonomy out. An additional consideration about authorizers is that if they're not doing their job, what do we do about that? Most places have no accountability at the authorizer level, but increasingly we're seeing places that are choosing to do that. Missouri's had a provision for authorizer accountability forever and ever. I don't think they use it. But Minnesota now does, and a variety of other places, Maine, places that have the newer charter laws, have a provision that says if you're an authorizer and you're not doing your job, you lose the right to be an authorizer. And if you can't close a school down, it's a difficult thing because parents really like it, you just try telling the district, you're not good enough to authorize charter schools anymore, and we're taking that back. This is not popular. But if you buy the sorts of things that I'm saying, that everybody has to do their job to make sure that the results are where they're supposed to be, and then you would trust a particular government office, whether it's a university or a state office or a district office, with that job, and they don't do their job, then really we should have a mechanism for that. So I'm in favor of this. Another factor that I think is getting more attention lately, and that I am personally spending a bunch of time on, is what I call non-academic accountability. Certainly there's no shortage of talking about academic accountability for charter schools, but what about the other stuff? Charter schools tend to be medium-sized businesses in their community. I mean, you can have a charter school in a small place with a $2 million payroll, $4 million payroll. That's a lot of money for a lot of communities. This is not, starting up some nonprofit that's $5,000 in the bank. And so the responsibility is to be good stewards of those funds. And everything that goes with it are substantial. And sometimes there is a tendency among people who maybe start these things for the wrong reasons, to start the school and find a way to create businesses that serve the school, and then start to make some money based on the food contract and the real estate and the management company and all the rest of it. And if you got online right now, there's a website called charterschoolscandals.com. It is not an unbiased website. And so you have to discount the different things that you see there. But there is no shortage of hearing that, as in Connecticut recently, somebody who founded the school also founded a management company that supports the school. It turns out he didn't mention that he was a felon, had been arrested for embezzlement and other kinds of bad financial things. I had served time, actually, for those things. And now he's one of sort of the leading lights of that charter sector there. And it all came up. So the schools that management company served are in trouble. The management company is instantly gone. The Secretary of Education left. If everybody doesn't play by the rules and stay in their lanes, it doesn't work. And so there needs to be attention to things like public accountability, public disclosure. Everybody's got open meeting laws and freedom of information laws, government in the sunshine, they call it. Those are applicable to charter schools, they're public entities. There needs to be an attention to transparency, is I guess what I'm saying, so that everybody has an opportunity to see that public monies are being well spent. Governance needs to be effectively carried out. We had a bunch of well-meaning, Harvard type of local community members who would like to do a charter school, and then they're the board. Do those folks have the knowledge base necessary to look at an audit? Do they have the knowledge base necessary to run effective meetings and to handle all of the complicated issues that come with doing this work? They're effectively like the board of trustees of a company that has $3 million a year coming into it. Are those folks ready to do that work? And the answer is, well, they probably aren't, or they may not be, but there are plenty of resources available to get them to that point. We don't need to reinvent that particular wheel. Authorizers, when they approve a charter application, can notice whether the people who